Right, Dr. Ciara Kelly is with us to talk to us about the story of the day, and it turns out probably the story of the millennium. The coronavirus situation has reached a point where finally English football decided this morning that they were cancelling everything. That means no games this weekend. That wasn't government policy.
No.
Government policy was for the games to continue, to the point where the rugby was going to continue until this afternoon as well. That got shelved, but what didn't get shelved was racing. Now, next week racing is going behind closed doors in the UK, almost like that's the right thing to do, they understand. However, 60,000 people every day at Cheltenham this week has been a massive story. Why did they do that? What do you think was behind the policy to continue people?
It's a very different policy to the one we've engaged with here, Ger. Obviously, we've banned all outdoor mass gatherings above 500 people. So 60,000 is multiples of that. And in my view, it shouldn't have happened. And in my view, from a public health point of view, having a melting pot that's big with so many people, all from different areas, all coming, all cheek by jowl, breathing, coughing, shouting, roaring, all rammed up against each other, and then all going back to wherever they come from, is a public health disaster during a pandemic. I think we just need to keep remembering we are in the delay phase of a pandemic. It's about to hit, and that's very, very worrying. And it's very, very worrying that 20,000 Irish people were there and are now coming back here. I don't believe it should have happened. I think that those who do return, I would call on them, despite the fact that it hasn't been demanded of them, to self-isolate. And if you know people who've been to Cheltenham, I would suggest you try and avoid too much contact with them for the next 2 weeks. And that's it, because I think that's sensible. Why they're doing what they're doing in the UK is certainly debatable, but they've taken a very different position to us and a lot of the rest of Europe. They're more like the American model of what's happening. Less testing, less restrictions, all of that. And I think there is something else in common. I think both the Boris Johnson government and the Donald Trump government would have quite a right-wing ideology, and I think they view this quite differently to how we view this.
Let's talk a little bit about that, because it seems to me that they talked a lot about the herd immunity, right? So if you were in a computer game, Sims or whatever, and you had a pandemic sweep through your society, you could trial and wargame a couple of different scenarios. One scenario is get everybody to get it really early and then return to normal life because the herd is now immune from it. The casualties would be huge. And you'd be like, well, that didn't work out very well for my population, my civilization. It's a computer game, that's okay. What the English government seem to have decided is that's what we're going to do, as opposed to let's try and stop everybody from getting it, delay as long as possible and hope that at some point the vaccines will kick in and we'll be able to save everybody.
We are currently faced with COVID-19. We have no immunity to it. We have no real treatments to it at the moment, although they are in development and they're not far away. And we have no vaccines to it at the present time, although I would suspect come the new year, one or other side of the new year, we probably will see that. But that's where we're at. You're exactly right. There are two ways to approach this. You can say let everyone get it and we will lose who we will lose. And we will lose. We'll lose thousands of people. If we just let it spread like wildfire, we will lose thousands of people. And yes, 80% of us will get a mild illness, 20% of us will become seriously unwell, and the Italian mortality rate currently is 6.6%. It's not the 2 to 3% we heard, so that's much higher. We'll lose people, and they will be the older people in the main, not exclusively. I mean, there was a 38-year-old footballer in ICU in Italy. There's 20-year-olds in ICU in Italy. So it's not exclusively old people, but mainly older people or vulnerable people or sick people. They're not expendable in my mind. I don't believe that we just write off huge swathes of the population as you know, well, if we're going to lose somebody, let's lose them. I find that abhorrent as an idea and as an ideology. There are two ways of looking at it, and how we're looking at it, I believe, both morally and from a public health point of view, is the correct one. If you try and think of it like a curve, like a bell curve, and I know we're getting a bit sort of technical, but if you think of it, if our case numbers climb like a sheer line, right?
We've seen it, we have also in the graphs, yeah.
If it climbs like a sheer line, our health service, which runs halfway through that line, won't be able to cope and loads of people will die. If we can flatten the curve, and there's a whole movement, hashtag flatten the curve, if you can bring it down so that the health service can cope with it, you will minimise deaths and illness from this disease. And that's what we're aiming to do here. And I believe that is the right thing to do from a public health point of view, and indeed from a moral point of view, that we would care for people who, as I say, are not expendable just because they're a little bit older or they have, you know, another disease or something. I think that's a crazy way to look at things. But yes, it would seem to me that I'm going to be straight, I don't believe what they're doing in the UK is ineptitude. I believe it's policy, and I believe they are doing, as you say, seeing where the casualties fall and hoping for the best. And like we've read, or I've certainly read things in the Telegraph, and I've heard things coming out of sort of right-wing Tory sort of groupings talking about cults and things like that. And I find it sickening, I really do. But I think there is an ideology that is at play behind this in the UK that is thankfully not at play. I was quite proud to hear Taoiseach Simon Coveney saying these people are our families and friends, the 20%, they are vulnerable and we want to protect them. And that's where I would stand on all of this.
Because that answers the question about why this happened in the UK. They wanted it to happen. They want people to get the coronavirus so that they can collectively reach a point where that's their
I'm sure
their
they would be denying vehemently that they want people to get the coronavirus, but I think the way they are behaving is facilitating the spread. If they don't close schools, they don't shut down mass gatherings, if they don't do those things, then certainly the spread will be accelerated there than here. And the NHS isn't overly, full of capacity to treat hundreds of thousands of sick people any more than any other health services. It's
almost like there's an experiment happening that we're going to wait and see exactly.
Well, we're all of these things dealing with the pandemic. This has never happened in living memory. Okay, we've had pandemics before. We had several in the last century, but they were more in the earlier part of the last century. 1918 is very famous, the Spanish flu, but there was other flu pandemics in the 50s and all that were very serious. These things have happened, but they've happened fairly long ago, Ger. So we always kind of said, modern medicine, it's not like the Spanish flu. We have better sanitation, we've got better hospitals, we do. But there isn't a health service on the planet that can cope with massive swathes of its population being critically unwell at the same time.
And that's what's going to happen in the UK. And that's what's going to happen in America.
And everywhere else. And flattening the curve will save lives. There's no two ways about that. And if you choose to not flatten that curve, it is because you are saying, well, we are modelling a system that more lives will be lost and maybe it will be a shorter term thing, but certainly more people will die.
And just to bring this all back to Cheltenham to finish up, there was a case in Cheltenham, the village before everybody arrived. More than likely there will be more cases. We're hearing rumours about other cases coming from there. If you are at Cheltenham and you're Irish, come home, stay home, don't talk to anybody.
I would ask people to do that as a sense of civic responsibility. Can I say one last thing? I'm obviously a broadcaster, present Lunchtime Live on News Talk. But before I was a broadcaster, I was a GP. In northern Italy, they didn't have a case of this 6 weeks ago. On Thursday, which is only yesterday, the senior GP in North Italy died from coronavirus. And I know my colleagues are on the front line, and I feel very proud of them, and I feel a little bit slack in some ways. Anyway, I feel like I need to do everything I can do to support them. And one of the things I can say is they're afraid to. They're going out and they're actually dealing with confirmed cases. They don't even have... People are stealing the personal protective equipment, the face masks and all from the hospitals. I know people who have seen cases that they are suspected to be cases and they haven't had masks or anything to protect themselves. And they're doing that and they're caring for the sick. And they aren't doing it with a murmur of complaint. They're putting themselves in harm's way to save other people. And that's what you do as a doctor or a nurse or a paramedic. You really do. And I'm very proud of them. But the least we can do as ordinary citizens is if we might be someone who's spreading the bloody thing, stay home. Keep away from your colleagues, your friends, your family and your neighbours. Give it 2 weeks. It's not too much to ask people. We all need to do our bit here. It's very important.
Ciara, great stuff. Thanks very much for joining us.